Hello and welcome to another episode of the Next Gen podcast. My name's Reece Land. I'm founder and managing director of Next Gen Sports Solutions. Today we're joined by my right-hand man. He's also Player Liaison Manager within Next Gen Sports Solutions and a former agent himself, Mr. Luke Moran. I know this interview will bring so many fascinating stories to what it's really like to work inside the world of football. Luke Moran, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Reece.
No problem. So, just for the benefit of this podcast and to introduce you a little bit, because I feel like sometimes you fly under the radar, sort of in the public eye in terms of what we do as a company. When I first started Next Gen Sports 3 years ago, Luke was the first person that I brought with me within the company. So at the time, Luke owned another sports management company. Luke was trying to get me, whilst I was still a player, to sign for his sports management company. So we were in discussions for about 3-4 months in regards to me signing for his company. I then had the idea to create Next Gen Sports, where my sports management company would represent me as a player. I then presented the idea to Luke, which would mean that he would leave the company that he formed. After about 2 hours, I think I convinced Luke to resign as a director of his company and come with me to Next Gen Sports. So I think during this podcast, we will delve deeper into what really happened during them times and what we do and what Luke's role is and how we operate as a company. So Luke, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Like I say, I'm just glad to be here.
Just want to sort of go back to the very, very start. And you owned a sports management company, quite similar to Next Gen Sports, but you worked over in men's football. What was the drive for you to become an agent, and how was it when you first formed the company?
Yeah, originally I was worked at a local sixth form college, which worked closely with the local youth football team. And anyway, cut a long story short, I was made redundant there, but I was speaking to these lads, and they were saying, well, what are you going to do now? You know, is there anything that you can do? And, you know, we really cherish what you've done for us, etc. Have you thought about going into football? Because I knew I was a big football fan and fan of the local team as well. And I just said, no, I didn't really, to be honest with you. So I did a bit of research and this, that, and I thought, do you know what, actually? I'd quite like to give being an agent a go. So I spoke to a few companies, and the worst thing to start with being an agent is actually making contact with these companies and people not getting back to you. They're not interested. They're not interested in helping you. So, apart from one person who did come back to me, and I spoke to him a few times, and he pointed out a few areas to look at and how to develop as an agent. But the vast majority of it was legwork with me. It was doing my research. It was looking over contacts. It was looking all on the websites of the FA, the rules and regulations, and really understanding the graft and the craft of being able to be a successful agent. So I was doing that for a good 12 months or so. And then I met a bloke on LinkedIn, actually, who was asking me questions about being an agent. And this, that, and the other, and we thought, okay, well, we'll form the sports management company together, which was great. It really was good. You know, the first few months, it was excellent. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And then, obviously, as we said there, Reece come along. I was trying to sign him, but obviously, as we went along, there was things that happened which I didn't particularly agree with, and so after speaking to Reece, like I say, he formed Next Gen, and I'd say a couple hours over a cup of coffee. And yeah, you convinced me to join you, and I've not really looked back since.
I think when we look back on that day when we first met in Doncaster, and I sort of gave you, we met originally for me to sign the contract with your sports management company, and then we left the meeting with essentially you resigning as a director of your company and coming with me. I want to sort of go back to that day, and when I look at that day now, it's quite surreal as to how that's actually played out. And I think the vision that I had, where you would leave your company and come to Next Gen Sports, we'd only have one client, which would have been me. It would have given me full control of my career, which is what I needed at the time. But for you as an agent, it must have been an agent's dream just to look after one player and sort of run the company at the same time as well. Going back to that day when I first gave you the idea, what's going through your head as I'm sort of outlining the philosophies and the project that we've got, knowing that you've got to leave a company to come to us?
Well, when you gave me that booklet to look over, I was thinking, wow, the principal ideas compared to what other sports management companies, including the one I was running, was completely different. And to be honest with you, I was thinking, I was a young lad with such a wise head on his shoulders, coming up with these ideas. You know, I knew that you knew the game inside out, and I knew that you knew how the game worked. But I was looking, I was thinking, yeah, this lad can go places. You know, I want to be part of this. And it takes a lot, really, for you to jump from one ship to another. You know, and coming on to and signing on to work with yourself at Next Gen, it certainly has opened so many doors and so many eyes. You know, you opened up lots of different areas of football, really, so to speak. You know, where you've managed to pull all these different things in.
I think looking back to that day, it's something that I think of quite a lot. And I think I was about 19, 20 at the time. And for me to come in with basically a different idea to every other agent, I mean, I wasn't even an agent at the time, but I knew what I needed as a footballer. So I needed to create a company that would deliver a service that would be bespoke and tailored to what I needed. And I think that's one of the reasons why, we'll obviously go on to this later on in the podcast, but why we've had such a quick rise within women's football as well. Because I think it's down to the services that we're offering. So I want to sort of just skip a few weeks here. So we've, whatever's happened within football surrounding my career, and I've ended up down in London for a few meetings surrounding my rehab. I then ended up at the Arsenal versus Chelsea under-19s match or whatever it was, and I ended up speaking to Arsene Wenger. I remember phoning you on the way back from London whilst I was driving back home. And I remember my words to you, which were, Luke, we are going into women's football. What's the first thing that's gone through your head as I've said them words? Because if you'd have asked me an hour before, we would have stayed in men's football. But after one conversation with Arsene Wenger, we've had a complete rebrand, a complete restructure. I phoned you and said, look, we're going into women's football.
My first thought was, you're nuts. Where's the money going to be coming from? How are you going to sustain? Have you thought it through? And then when you told me what Arsene Wenger had mentioned to you, I could see the bigger picture, and I was thinking, well, there's not actually that many people involved in women's football. At the time, I think, 2, 3 agents?
Yeah, there weren't many at the time.
At best.
Yeah, there weren't many at the time. I think for us to go in sort of 2.5 years ago, which we did, was a massive gamble for us. Because if we knew the finances surrounding women's football, which were virtually nothing. So for us to make a company sustainable within a market that's effectively not there was a massive risk for us. And I think that first 12 months were quite hard. So what we did after that first conversation were we studied women's football for 6 months. And if you remember, we went to games, we looked at player footage, we had a complete rebrand in how we marketed Next Gen Sports. We marketed Next Gen Sports as a female sports management company. And within that first 6 months before we'd even signed a player, I don't know if you remember this, but we had, how many? We had over 100 inquiries from players sending CVs and footage before we signed our first player, which was Ellie Mason.
Yeah, I remember it well.
So I think
that day well.
Yeah, I think that 6 months were a strange period for us because we were going through a transition as a company into a complete unknown market.
Yeah, I think it was a strange, and like I say, it was very much uncharted territory. But as you said, we just completely rebranded the company, rebranded the philosophy, put forward what we believed, and ultimately put the players first.
Yeah,
so what do the women's footballers need? What do women's footballers need? And that's where we went.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think 2.5 years ago, we could see the direction that women's football was going in. We could see the transition from sort of an amateur setup to a more professional setup. So for us to go in with a management company, I think that the agents that were in women's football 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago were an agent. I don't think they were a management company. And I think that's what set us differently to the others, where we were coming in and saying, right, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. We're not just here to do your contracts. We're here to manage your career.
Yeah, that's it. And that's the difference between a lot of agents as well. There's a lot of agents who won't manage their career. They're con artists. A lot of them. They're in it for the money. Whilst with the women's game, you have to do it right. Because ultimately, if you don't do it right, you may as well call it quits.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've noticed, especially over the last 12 months, the amount of agents that are now coming into women's football because they can see the growth. They can see the growth in the mainstream media, can see the growth maybe in the finances. But the agents that are coming in don't tend to stay that long because they realise that they might only earn £3 a month from a player. And if that's the case, you need 10,000 players. Do you know what I mean? To create a sustainable income. So the amount of work that gets put in for the financial return, a lot of the agents don't tend to stay in women's football for too long.
No, they don't. And that's the difference. It's a matter of picking the market right. A tip really, or how we've done it, is we've not necessarily gone for the best there and then. But we've gone and got the players who we can see the potential, and we've said that's great that you want to be at the top level, but right now we believe that you should be here. And we've suffered with at the start of only getting, as you quoted there, sometimes £3 a month from players. On top of that, you've developed the player into where they want to be, or further, or they're even going to go the next step.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of agents that do come into women's football, they are going to chase for money. So if they're going to advise a player to go into maybe the Super League and sit on the bench, just because the player's going to be on more money, so it means the agent's going to be on more money. But in retrospect, that's probably not the best move for the player. So we might advise a player to go into the championship, learn your craft, be the best striker in the championship, rather than sitting on the bench and playing 3 or 4 matches a season in the Super League. Because the season after, if you're only on a 1-year contract, the season after, if you're sat on the bench in the Super League, they're probably not going to extend your contract. If you've been the best striker in the Championship, you're then going to have more options in the Super League. And I think that's where a lot of agents go wrong, because they are going to chase for money, where we've sort of got a different outlook, because that's the advice that I would have needed as a footballer. I think a lot of agents, and you'll probably agree with me on this, Luke, but I think there's 2 different types of agents. There's agents that are very, very good businessmen, and there's agents that are very, very good on the development side and getting the best out of the players.
can agree. At the end of the day, you speak to a lot of players, both men and women. They've all come across good and bad agents. The good agents are the ones that look after them. They know that they're there. They're like a brother or a sister to them. Whilst the bad agents are, you've got the potential. You could be playing in, for example, the WSL. However, in the 4th division, they're offering you twice as much money. Go there.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Exactly. And you just mentioned something there about being a brother or being someone who you can rely on. I remember saying to you in the first ever meeting, I need to create a culture and an environment that is like a family. Because I'm a firm believer that family should never let you down. And what I needed as a footballer were an agent that I could speak to about absolutely anything. And I've worked with agents where I'd speak to them twice a year, once in April to see if I needed a move in the summer, and once in December to see if I needed a move or a new contract in January. That's not the relationship that I believe is beneficial, especially for women's football. I think you need that culture where it is like a family, and that's where the hashtag NextGenFamily has come from, because it's a culture and an environment that we're trying to create and trying to promote internally.
And that's it. You've hit a nail on the head. It's a family thing. Being an agent, it's not about how much money you can earn. It's been the family, because you know full well that the money's going to come alongside being the family.
Yeah, exactly. And I know the work that you do, and I know that players that are with Next Gen Sports have phoned you at 2 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock at night and said, "Luke, I'm struggling." And 10 o'clock at night, you've drove down, you met them for a coffee. You've been on the other end of the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning when a player needs you. There's agents that I've worked with that if I phone them at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're going to think I've been out drinking and they're not going to answer the phone, or you're not going to be able to rely on them to answer the phone when you need them the most.
That's it. I mean, not only working with Next Gen, but when other clients before all this, I've had people who've rung me and said, "Look, I'm suffering mentally, I'm not too good." And they've had a good 2 or 3 days a week spending 3-4 hours on the phone to them. And it's just about being that person, that supportive side of things. That's the thing. It's not just in football, it's in everyday life. You be that supportive person, people will listen to you.
Yeah, exactly. I think if we can create a culture as well where the players know that they're safe within the environment and they know they've got someone who they can rely on, we're going to get a better client on the pitch as well. Because if we can ease as much stress as possible from the player, they can go out on a Saturday or a Sunday and perform to their best of their ability.
Yeah, they can, because they know they've got that supportive network behind them. And it's that supportive network which gives people boosts. And that's the thing. It's having that person who will tell you straight, but it's having that person who will, full well 100% back them up, no matter what.
Yeah.
And that's where people differentiate. Different agents differentiate. Some agents would quite happily toss them under the bus. But other agents would be there saying, even though you know full well that they're in the wrong, I back my client for doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's that family supportive network.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember saying to you when we first started Next Gen Sports that we were quite big on the infrastructure surrounding the client welfare. And I think when you look at our infrastructure now, I don't think there's going to be many other management companies that have got performance psychologists. They've got player liaison welfare officers working for them. They've got mental health specialists working for them. Like I said earlier, there's sort of 2 different types of agents. There's an agent that you know is going to get you the best deal, and there's an agent that's going to look after you.
Bingo, exactly. And that's the thing as well with Next Gen. is not only you've got that, but you've got this supportive network, but you've got people who you've brought in to be able to help you as well on that side of things, such as the sport psychologist, someone who's there if someone is troubled, because obviously we can only do so much, but if we know for a while that you need somebody who can get into the mind, who can release these emotions that are causing trouble. And that's where Next Gen's move forward as well. That's the biggest thing. That I firmly believe having that supportive network is a huge help for players. Clubs have them, so why does it not stop a company like Next Gen or any other sports management company not having them? At the end of the day, we need to look after our clients, and looking after your clients will reward them and it will reward us.
Yeah, exactly. And not only in sport, I think every organisation, every company should have that welfare division internally where if their staff members are struggling, because, you know, for us, for me as a company owner, my staff, and then for us as a company, our clients, they have a driving force within the company. They're also representing us. So it's our duty to look after them. We run off 3 principles within Next Gen Sports: promote, protect, and enhance. Promote through the media and through our internal media strategies that we've got. But the protection is probably the biggest one out of the 3. So protect contractually, making sure that contract is watertight. The player's going to be protected, worst case scenario. And then enhance, when the player's ready to step up, we can open doors for them. And that's the 3 principles that we work off: promote, protect, and enhance.
Yeah, it is.
Just wanted to sort of speak about football agents in general now, and there's a horrible stigma surrounding football agents. Me and you have both been in meetings, or we've both been working abroad or down south or wherever. We've both been in bars or both been in restaurants or talking to people in the general public, and we've told them we're a football agent, and we just get the most disgusting look, or we get absolutely battered because of the stigma that's associated with being a football agent. Have you got any, I know you've got a few actually, so don't get us into trouble by telling any of these on the podcast, but have you got any stories that you can tell on the podcast about any sort of bad experiences from you being an agent?
Yeah, I've had Twitter abuse, which is that's just as bad as being verbally abused in person. Even though we might be agents and you think that we're invincible and we can take it on the chin, you still read those comments. You still, especially if you're brand new to the industry. I mean, I've had before now, I've been threatened. I've had where I've spoken to another agent's client, and this other agent actually found out about it and is threatened to come round and break their legs. But then I've had, when it comes to the general public, you certainly get abuse. You get, like I say, Twitter abuse. I've had it where you tell them people, oh, what do you do? And you could tell 10 lads, 9 of the lads would be very much interested, but that 10th lad would very much be saying, well, you're just robbing. You're just taking money off players, you know, you're just money grabbers. It's people like you, the reason why he spoils football.
Driving money out of football is something that I tend to get a lot.
Yeah. And the thing is as well with that, is that what I tend to say is, whilst I agree with you for 75% of what you're saying, however, not all agents are the same. If you got to know me as an agent, you know full well I'm a lot different to that. I'm not in it to earn the millions and millions of pounds as much as it's nice. I'm also in it to help the players develop. And as we said, covered earlier, these players are the ones that are going to be, they're going to come through, and it'll work out for you if you manage them correctly. But the general public don't understand that. What it doesn't help is that you've got the media, and you've got people in the media, and you've got people who they talk about agents, people, for example, chief execs of football teams at top levels, who talk about agents, and they talk about agents as if they're the scum of the earth.
Yeah, and then they're influencing the public perception.
That's it. And that's where the public, they won't listen to Reece Land and Moran of Next Gen Sports. They'll listen to whoever's top dog of whatever club in the Premier League, Championship, League One, League Two. And that's why the public stigma and the opinions of agents is the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I was working away in Europe about 2 months ago, and I was sat I sort of working on my own abroad, and I was sat having a meal in a restaurant, and ended up speaking to this man, another English man that was over there, and he said to me, "What do you do?" So I told him, and he used that phrase that all we do is drive money out of football. And I'm sat there thinking, if you knew when we first started, or quite recently, sort of 18 months ago, we were only getting paid £3 a month by a couple of our clients. If women's football needs that £34 a year or £36 a year, women's football is in a far worse place than what people think. Because if we're driving £34 a year or £36 a year out of football, then I dread to think what some of the big agents are doing. But when you sort of we look at the big agents, we all get tarnished with the same brush.
We do. Yeah, we do. And that's where there's a lot of people get it all wrong. And the thing is as well, what I've noticed is that there's even some footballers, they say the same thing. You just drive us out. But I think other footballers who have had that supportive network realise, well, hang on a second, actually, my agent was all right. My agent was fine. He looked after me. He got me the best deal for me, not for him. At the end of the day, we don't play football. We're not privileged enough to be able to play it at a professional level. However, we are privileged enough to be able to help the progression of people's careers, and hopefully it's successful.
Yeah, exactly. And you just mentioned there about sort of players having a bit of an impression of agents built up in their mind. But majority of agents will work on a percentage. So for a player to think that we are overcharging or we're just driving money out of football, we charge a percentage. And it's not as if we're charging 80% or 70% or 60 or 50. We're charging a minute percentage. So the money that we're driving out of football, we're not really driving out of football, because that percentage is essentially going to the player anyway. It's going in the player's contract. I do agree with a lot of the statements where the player should pay and not the club. But I want to sort of look at this from a different aspect as well. If we're doing a transfer, an international transfer, let's say, so we've got to fly over to Germany. If we've got to have 4 meetings with a club in Germany, which might cost us £500 each meeting, if we've spent £2,000 to do a transfer, but we're only going to earn £200 from the percentage that we get from the player, then the club does need to support the agent in order to get that deal across the line. And I think that's one of the reasons why agents' fees have started and why clubs have started paying agents, because a lot of the deals that we do internally, maybe the first 12 months, we will run at a loss on that deal. But yet, the impression of agents is we're driving money out of football.
Yeah, exactly.
Just staying on the subject of sort of the big agents, what's your opinions? I'm going to ask you on 2 scenarios here. What's your opinions on the Mino Raiola and Paul Pogba situation with Manchester United, and also the Jonathan Barnett and Gareth Bale situation with Real Madrid?
I've got the same opinion for both. I think Raiola and Jonathan Barnett are playing absolute blinders with Gareth Bale and Paul Pogba. The reason why, and I could be unpopular here, is at the end of the day, Gareth Bale, for example, he's been pushed out effectively by Zidane at Madrid. Gareth Bale's on all this money, and at the end of the day, he deserved that move. What was it, 4 years ago, however long ago it was when he moved over. Jonathan Barnett's gone and looked after the best interests, which what we're saying, he moved him from Tottenham to the next stage, which was Real Madrid. It's not his fault that Real Madrid are now saying we don't want you.
No, exactly. And loads of people ask me this question about these two situations, and something that I say about the Jonathan Barnett and Gareth Bale and Real Madrid situation is Real Madrid have put him on a 5 or 6 year contract on £600,000 a week. Real Madrid have put him on that contract. Jonathan Barnett hasn't gone into a meeting and held a gun to Real Madrid's head and said, you must pay Gareth Bale this. So Jonathan Barnett and Gareth Bale are basically just standing strong and saying, no, you've given me this contract, you need to honour it or you need to pay me up. And if we translate this to any other industry, it's going to be the same thing. But because we're talking about £500,000 or £600,000 a week, it gets magnified horrendously. But how many people move jobs for less money? And Gareth Bale knows that if he leaves Real Madrid, he's got to take a pay cut.
Exactly. He does. He does. And the thing is as well is that even though he's on £500,000, whatever it is a week, the unbelievable deal that he's managed to land himself with, he knows that his next stage is going to be a stage of where it's going to be less money for him. And the standard of football, or the standard of the team of football where he's moving to, is highly likely, I'm not saying it's not going to be, it's highly likely to be of a less standard as of Real Madrid. But then it's up to Gareth Bale then to how he manages his career and Jonathan Barnett.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, if he decides I want to drop down another level, I'm going to have to take a pay cut, so be it. Quite clearly, Jonathan Barnett and Gareth Bale are both sat in Madrid, or Bale sat in Madrid rather, and he's now thinking, well, I'm on this money, I'm probably not going to get it again. Make the most of it.
Yeah, exactly. I get asked every single day about the Paul Pogba and Mino Raiola, and you've probably got a similar sort of take on this because we see it from the inside. And my view on all this is, why would Mino Raiola waste his time trying to orchestrate a move for Paul Pogba if Paul Pogba has told him he doesn't want to move? An agent always acts under the instruction of their player. If a player says, get me a move, the agent will start orchestrating a move. If a player says to the agent, I don't want to leave, I want to stay here, the agent's not going to waste his time and try and get a move. You've also got to understand that Mino Raiola's a multi-millionaire. He's not doing this for money. If he's earned £70 million from the Juventus and Man United and Paul Pogba deal, he's not short of money. And people say that Mino Raiola sees Paul Pogba as a cash cow, and when Paul Pogba retires, he's not going to have anyone similar. He is. Look at the players that Mino Raiola represents. He's the biggest agent, in my opinion, in world football. Every player wants to be with him. So, he's not going to just fall flat after Paul Pogba retires. And in all fairness, he probably doesn't have to work anyway, Mino Raiola.
No. And that's it. At the end of the day, it's what we'll go back to. We listen to the player. We work for the player's interest, not our own pocket's interest. that's all Raiola's doing. Pogba, at the end of the day, his interest, unfortunately, is money. There's other players who Raiola will have whose interest is to play football. So Raiola is going in on those instructions, as you say. Pogba said, I want to stay at United. Okay, we'll stay at United. Gareth Bale said, I want to stay at Madrid. All right then, stay at Madrid. But the good thing about a good agent as well, which other people don't see, Jonathan Barnett and Mino Raiola take the flak. But the reason they're taking the flak is to move the limelight from their player.
Yeah,
they're the shield.
Yeah, it's to protect the player.
And that's the difference. That's the difference. Good agents do that. Bad agents will say, yeah, you're right. He shouldn't be at United. He should be going here. He should be going there. But they believe in their client, and that's where agents are differentiated between them.
Yeah, exactly. And also, this with Paul Pogba and Mino Raiola and Manchester United, this has been going on now for about 18 months. If Paul Pogba didn't agree with it, he'd sack Mino Raiola, because he would be making it so hostile when he's going into training. But his teammates must know that Paul Pogba doesn't want to be there, and this is a reason why this is all happening. But if Paul Pogba didn't agree with it, he would just sack his agent, if contractually he were allowed to do that.
Yeah, he would. He would. But it's a matter of, there's the agreement. Quite clearly, there's that close understanding and agreement between Pogba and Raiola. You've got that working relationship where Raiola trusts Pogba and Pogba trusts Raiola. Bale trusts Jonathan Barnett. Jonathan Barnett trusts Gareth Bale. You've got to work that relationship. You've got to get that trust between clients. If you don't have that trust between the clients, and the client thinks, what's my agent doing? You may as well give it up as a bad job.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't have that about yourself, and that's for all up-and-coming agents, because there's plenty of people out there who want to be agents, who think they can come in and do, I can throw my weight around, I'm so-and-so and so-and-so, I can talk the talk. At the end of the day, if you've not got that trust, or can't build a trust with club, player, managers, coaches, kit people, anyone to do with football, chief execs, give up as a bad job.
Yeah.
Already go look for another career.
Exactly. I just want to move back onto Next Gen Sports now, and I've asked this morning a few people what questions they want me to ask on this podcast and what they'd like to know about sort of working within the industry. So I've got a few questions now, and the first question is, who's the nicest person that you've done business with or that you've met in men's football?
Oof. There's a fair few people out there. The one that strikes me is a bloke called Stuart White. I met Stuart in Sheffield when I was only nicely starting up, really, the company I owned. And we had a good chat for about 3 hours, and it flew by. I'll always be forever grateful for Stuart for spending time with me. I think he's chief scout, or he's certainly high up at Hull City now, or was. I'm not too sure where he is now. And he spent a good, 3 hours with me. And he taught me what's good between working with agents, what's bad about agents. And the one thing that's always stuck with me, and it's worked, is that he's always said to me, no matter what or who you offer a player to, you could offer a player to 10 teams. 5 of those teams could come back to you. And if you just simply send a little email to say, thank you for the interest, however, the players decide to go elsewhere. Because he says there's nothing more infuriating to him. At the end of the day, he's had it where he's been chasing, and he's found out on the news, Sky Sports News, that they signed somewhere else. And immediately, straight away, it's like, poof, not working with that agent.
Yeah, I can understand that, to be honest.
So I'll be always forever grateful for Stuart.
Moving on to another question now, where you've worked across Europe within Next Gen Sports, either meeting players or meeting clubs. Which is the best country that you've worked in?
Oh, good grief. I mean, England, because I can understand the language. But the best country I've worked in is probably Norway. The Norwegians are so grateful. They're so grateful and down to earth. They really, really made you feel welcome. When I was speaking to them, because there was one in particular circumstance, is that they got to know me, whilst there's other people who just want what they want. They got to know me. You know, we went for a few drinks, you know, and make it as a personable level. Had some food together.
Mm.
You know, I met the families. And there's little touches like that. But the Norwegians in particular, Norway's one of my favourite countries to go to now. Yeah, no, I'd say the Norwegians, 100%. I know you've got a few few countries as well on your mileage. What about yourself?
There's a few countries that I don't like dealing with, and it's because of the hostility when you get there, and then they fly you in, you've got the meeting, and then they fly you straight back out. The hospitality side for me makes a difference. So, like, for example, if I'm working in Cyprus or Spain or Germany, the club always looks after me. I'm not saying like pay for my hotel or anything. I'm saying if I need anything whilst I'm there, or like when I say need anything, it might be where's the best restaurant around the area. If I can text someone and I can rely on someone, then that for me is the main thing. Because there's nothing worse than if you're working in a country, you can't speak the language, you've literally been picked up from the airport, shoved in a hotel, you don't know where you are. It's a bit unnervy, especially the first time when you go there as well.
It is, and no matter whatever country you visit, even though they might be the nicest people in the world, that first few minutes when you land, your heart's racing for the first time. If you're in the first time you've ever been to this particular country, your heart's racing.
Oh, 100%.
I don't care what people say, you might be the most confident person in the world. If they say to you, I was never nervous, yeah, rubbish, absolute rubbish.
Exactly, and I mean, in all honesty, the majority of the clubs that we deal with, they arrange for someone to pick us up from the airport. The first time when you deal with that club, you don't really know who's picking you up from the airport, because majority of the time it's a chauffeur that works on the club. It's not a taxi driver, so you end up getting in the back of a Range Rover or whatever else. It's quite scary, very, very scary.
It is, yeah. And that's what the good thing with it is that you get used to it. Once you've done it once and you got to know the people, it's fine. The problem is that there's other countries, as you say, where you've been to where it's a little more hostile, and you're thinking,
yeah,
I don't really want to be part of this, to be honest with you. And you go in and you do your job, and there's an element of sigh of relief when you're sat in that waiting lounge ready to come back home.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I've got a couple of stories from the January transfer window, and one is I've sort of gone through customs, gone through passport control as I've landed, and I've been escorted into this room with someone questioning me, obviously the work for the airport, and I've got to explain why I'm there, who I'm there to see, and that's quite scary because you've got someone interrogating you, there's a language barrier to start with, and behind you you've got 3 people all holding shotguns. And that in January, I remember phoning you as I got out of the airport and saying, wow, you do not understand what I've just been through in the last hour. And then you also mentioned about the language as well. When I went to the meeting in France in January this year or December, and the translators let me down literally 10 minutes before the meeting, and I'm sure the listeners have realised we're both from Yorkshire. Half of the English clubs struggle to understand us, let alone the clubs out in Europe.
It's to our advantage at times, though, to be fair.
Yeah, it probably does. But to be let down 10 minutes before the meeting starts by a translator, that's also quite scary, because you don't want to go into a meeting and then the club get the impression that you're just there wasting time, because there is a huge language barrier. And yeah, so being an agent is a lot scarier than what people think at times.
Yeah, it is. It is, but like I say, it's a matter of once you get over that fear factor. Because I think it's fair to point out that the vast majority of the countries that we go to are lovely.
Oh yeah, 100%.
They are lovely, but you do have the experience of where you're thinking, I don't really want to go through that again.
No, exactly. I've got one country in mind that I don't think I'll ever return to, because the hostility and everything else that was going on at the time, it scared me, and it put me off returning, if I'm being honest. So again, just reverting back to Next Gen Sports, at the minute we're sort of going through a period where we're getting 15, 20 new inquiries each week. What would you say, you obviously work for a company so you see it from the inside, but what would you say is the reason why we are getting that demand from players, not just players, from managers and coaches that's also wanting to be represented?
I believe the reason why is because we are simply good at what we do. We're good at what we do. The thing is, as well, is that you might have the best marketing team going. You might have the best agents who can earn money going. However, you might have the worst reputation. And what's good about us is that we've got a reputation where we look after our clients. They know we look after them. Hence, they're happy to re-sign with us. They're happy to refer their friends. The word of mouth in football travels far. There's people where I've known it, where there's somebody who's done a dodgy deal way up north. By the time they've even got down to the south, hours later, it's already got down to that. That's how quick it works in football, but that's how quick you can use it to your advantage. And these people who are contacting us, our vast majority of them is word of mouth. Word of mouth. They realise how good we are. They realise how much we promote ourselves on Twitter, but also they realise how much people promote us. The teams promote us. We get recommendations. The amount of times I get messages on Twitter, I'm supposed, can I send my CV across to you? If I send you some video clips, will you take me on?
Yeah.
And that's just via Twitter. At the end of the day, that's just a DM. But the thing is, as well, is that there's a lot of people who talk. When you're in a club, you get one person you sign up and you go, oh, I've signed up with Next Gen. Oh, yeah, what they're like? Oh, they're really good. They offer this, that, and the other. Oh, my agent can offer that. Let me ring my agent up. Why are you not offering this, that, and the other? Oh, we can't. Oh, right, well, I want to leave.
Yeah,
exactly. You got a phone call.
Exactly. I think we did a bit of research internally a few weeks ago, and I think it was something like what was it? I think it was 82% of players that we asked that have worked with other agents all were unhappy with the service from the other agent. 82% is a ridiculously high number. But I think it's because a lot of the other agents within women's football are agents and not management companies. So they haven't got that relationship between agent and client.
No, they haven't. The amount of people that you speak to and they say, like I said, I wasn't happy with that. I wasn't happy with this, that, and the other. You offer far much more. You've got that personal touch about you.
Yeah, exactly. Something that we announced quite recently, which we've been in talks for now about 6 to 8 months, about entering the American market. And it is now Wednesday, and over the bank holiday and the last 2 days, so over the last sort of 5-6 days, we've had 8 NWSL players inquire with NGS to be represented by us. 2 questions. What do you think is the reason why NWSL players are now contacting Next Gen Sports? And the second question is, what were your thoughts when I first told you that we should be going into the American market?
I believe firmly that the reason why they're contacting us is because they can see what work we're doing over here, and they're thinking, well, they're missing the market. They're missing that over in America. Quite clearly, I'm unfortunate enough never to have actually worked in America. Excited about being able to go over and work in America. But these players who have contacted us have said, you are exactly what we need. And this is where there's potentially that missing jigsaw piece in the American market for an agency like us to go in and deal with these players, because they're not all British players that have inquired with us. They are American women over there who want an agency like ours.
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
where we can go in and be able to offer our services to them, and for them to understand the way we work, and for us to effectively go in with fresh ideas, and for players to come to us and say, hang on a sec, we haven't ever had this before, this is new, this is great. So I made players from the NWSL over in America, and for them not really to know much about the British market, but then to understand what values we offer and what that care package that we are tailored towards different players to make it bespoke to them.
Yeah.
Incredible.
I look at the agents or the sports management companies that are in America, and I don't believe, and I'm probably biased because I own Next Gen Sports, but I truly do believe there is not a sports management company in America or in the UK or even in Europe that have got the infrastructure that we have got.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. We've got everything a player needs. We've got not only a player, a manager, a coach, a physiotherapist, a chief exec, whatever. Everything they want involved in the women's game, we've got.
Yeah, exactly. So you tend to deal with the university students that contact us, either wanting work experience or they might be a graduate, sort of looking for a job after university. What do you think do you think that the university students are set up to go straight into the football industry? Do you think they're being taught what the industry is actually like?
No, I don't. I'll tell you why. We've had people come to us and say, we can offer you this, that and the other, marketing-wise. And when it comes to it, they want a budget of this, they want a budget of that, they want a budget of the other. They want a budget to be able to put big billboards up. They want a budget to be able to put posters and banners. They want a budget to be able to do this, that, and the other. But this is all that they've been taught at uni. They're taught as if they're going to walk straight into a £1 million project. It doesn't work like that. The way that people need to come in, they need to come in from the bottom. It's like anywhere. They need to come in from the bottom. They need to figure out how they're going to get the best deal with little money. And that's the difference. These university students, not only in marketing, in agents. I've had uni students who have contacted me and said, I'm going to be the next football agent. What can I do? I put, okay, great. I say, okay, great. What contacts you got?
Yeah, exactly. And I actually had one this weekend, a university student that is doing I don't know what the course is, but is basically learning to be a football agent. And he sent me his CV and said, I think I'm ready for the industry. Can I just have 5 minutes on the phone to you? And anyone that inquires, I'll always speak to them. If I've got time, then I'll always speak to them. So on Saturday or Sunday, I had about 5 or 10 minutes on the phone to him, and very, very confident, very likable person. And I just asked him a question. I said, if I were to give you a football contract, what's the main things that you would look for in order to negotiate? Or what would you look to take out? Or what would you look to add in? He came back and he said, well, obviously the two main things are how much you're getting paid and how long's a contract. And I said, you do realise that football contracts are 60, 70-page documents. It's not just a piece of paper that says you're going to get this much for this amount of time. And it was a little bit frustrating to me because I thought, this is someone that's spending X amount of money at university to become a football agent, but isn't getting the specific teaching.
That's it. At the end of the day, the only reason you're going to be a top football agent is learning your craft in the industry. It's not going to university. As sad as it sounds, university sets you up so far. Coming and actually working in the industry and understanding the industry and having experience of the industry goes far more towards you being successful compared to somebody who's just left university. Like I say, I asked players, I asked people who've contacted us and said, I want to be a football agent. I always straight away said, right, okay, give me one contact that you've got. I ain't got one.
Yeah, you're going to struggle if you don't know anyone. I mean, I was quite lucky. I mean, I didn't come in with any understanding of being an agent, but I knew footballers. I'd been around a few clubs. I knew contacts within the clubs. So even if we would have gone into men's football, we wouldn't have started from rock bottom. And that's one of the reasons why, for me to create Next Gen Sports, I had to bring someone in with me that knew the industry, because I was starting it as a complete novice. And for me to be an agent and a footballer and represent myself, for a start, it would have been far too complicated. But it would have been a lot more hassle than what it was worth, because I wouldn't have had the contacts. If I'd have had the contacts, I wouldn't have needed an agent to start with. So, yeah, you're right when you say contacts.
Yeah, you need contacts and you need resilience. In the day, you're going to be knocked back a lot, even with the contacts you know. Even if you've got these contacts, you still get knocked back by them. And that element of resilience is what gets you through. At the end of the day, my advice, if I was to give any piece of advice, even people who've come to me and said, I've got this contact, that contact, the other contact, fantastic, you're set up nicely. However, where's your first payment going to come from?
Yeah. I think as well...
And that's another one where it's like,
yeah, I think...
Honestly, you've got to get another job.
Yeah.
Why you set yourself up with it?
100%. I think the first 12 months of being an agent, in fact, I'd even go as far as saying the first 2 years, if you are starting from rock bottom, you need a job, because you're going to be travelling around the country, you're going to be travelling around Europe, you're not going to have any players, you're not going to have any contacts, you're going to have to stay overnight in hotels, you have to get the train, you have to get the tube if you're in London. You need at least £20,000 to start a sports management company, and that's just for the travel. If you need the infrastructure, you need a good legal team behind you, you need a good finance team behind you. So, lawyers aren't cheap, solicitors aren't cheap, accountants aren't cheap, financial advisors aren't cheap. As you get more complex, you do need solicitors, you do need financial advisors, because you need to make sure that contracts are tax efficient. You need to make sure that there's no ways around image rights. So you need to make sure that contracts are watertight. And in order to do that, you need money.
Yes, you do. And that's why you need that second job. that second job gives you that stability. At the end of the day, if you used to go straight into being an agent, got no money, got no contacts, or you've got contacts but no players, but these players are going to have to go on trial up and down the country. You go with them.
Yeah,
you're out of pocket.
Exactly. And we know this from Next Gen Sports, the amount of players that we've sent on trial where the player's probably struggling financially, so we've had to pay for their hotel. We don't get that reimbursed by the club 90% of the time. So again, every client that we get, we see it as an investment. And for us to invest in the client, we're not just investing financially, we're investing on a development level. So however we can protect and enhance that player, we will. Because we need a player to be with us at least 3 years before we start making a profit from that player.
Yes, you do. You do. You need that element. You need that base.
Yeah, exactly. Luke, thank you so much for joining us. And for the benefit of this podcast, me and you speak at least an hour every single day of the week, even Saturday and Sundays. So for you to spend,
I don't know if it's me using I'm not sure.
Yeah, you're definitely the lucky one. So for you to spend another hour.
I feel sorry for the listeners who are going to have to listen to this and need the subtitles for our accent.
Don't worry, we'll put subtitles underneath.
Excellent.
But yeah, thank you for spending an hour on the phone to me. I really do appreciate it.
No problem. Speak to you tomorrow.
I'll speak to you tomorrow. Keep your eyes out for future podcasts by Next Gen Sports Solutions as we take a deeper look into players' lives and what goes on behind the scenes as we carry on speaking to Next Gen Sports clients and industry leaders within the sports and business sector.